Morning, guys. Just a bit of a recap. We're on Romans 11 at the moment, and we've been talking about Paul's letter to the Romans. And the Roman church was quite an interesting church because it wasn't founded by the apostles and it wasn't founded by Paul. It was probably founded by a bunch of Jews that were living in Rome. Now, there were about 40,000 Jews living in Rome at the time. So I imagine it went something like this. There were a group of them that went to Jerusalem for the Passover. They probably witnessed the crucifixion and maybe even were there at the day of Pentecost. And then later on they returned home to Rome, taking the gospel with them. I imagine that over time, Rome being a very cosmopolitan place, a few Gentiles became members of the church, and then later on, Emperor Claudius, who was the emperor at the time, he expelled the Jews from Rome, and so then the church continued for a while as a Gentile church, and then his successor, Nero, who is quite an infamous character, but he invited the Jews back, and so it was a Jewish church, then a mixed church, then it was a Gentile church, and then it was a mixed church again. So this is the situation that Paul's speaking into. This is the background, and so I think his main concern is with the church unity. You see, this belief had started to creep in that the Jews had rejected Jesus. Their expulsion from Rome was God's punishment, and that they were no longer the chosen people, no longer God's chosen people, and they'd been replaced by the church. So there's a potential split in the church which could easily spread throughout the known world, because Rome was pretty much the center of the world at that time. So Paul uses a very interesting metaphor to clarify his position. He uses the picture of a tree. I'd like to read from Romans 11, verse 17 and 18. If some of the branches have been broken off, and you, though a wild olive shoot, have been grafted in among the others, and now share in the nourishing sap from the olive root, do not consider yourselves to be superior to those other branches. If you do, consider this: you do not support the root, but the root supports you. See, the picture of a tree is quite a powerful picture because it's throughout the Bible. And in Genesis, as a result of our rebellion, we were denied access to the tree of life. And God has developed a plan to fix this situation. And it's a very complex plan because it's a very complex problem. When I was starting to prepare for today, I took a walk through this orchard next to my house, and I was trying to clear my head a little bit, and I wouldn't maybe say I was meditating. That's probably making it sound very impressive. All I was doing was just wandering around thinking, and it struck me that a tree really is a very powerful image of God's rescue plan for us. So today I'm going to talk about trees. Now, if you have a look at the scene behind me, and if I was to ask you, what do you see? You'd probably answer that you see a tree. And that's only partly true, because what you actually see is half a tree. About half of the mass of the tree is in the root system, and that's underground, it's unseen. Makes up half the tree, but it's probably the most important part. Without a healthy root system, a tree doesn't stand any chance of survival. So when you start establishing an orchard like this, you start off a couple of years before the first tree goes in the ground. You start the process, and you start working on the rootstock. That's what you really need, because that's what supplies the water and the nutrients, the nourishing sap that Paul is talking about. Now, the Jewish nation is God's chosen rootstock. They were chosen by God provide a strong and healthy platform on which to build the faith. He spent thousands of years developing them for this task. The Old Testament law is the root of our faith. The whole process by which we are to be saved is built into it. And the whole Old Testament points towards Jesus. I'm actually amazed. I've been doing a bit of reading about Jesus in the Old Testament recently, and it's really amazing. I'm not talking just about the specific prophecies that were fulfilled, but the pictures and the images and the types that are all built into the Old Testament, all pointing towards Jesus and all preparing the way for us to find him in the future. Isaiah 11 verse 1 says, "A shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. From his roots a branch will bear fruit." Now Jesus is the root that emerged from the chosen people. He is the trunk of the new tree of life that God is creating. The next step in the process of establishing an orchard is to girdle the budwood. Now this is done a few weeks before grafting, and a section of bark is stripped from the branch to be grafted. It's normally done with a pair of pliers. There are various different tools that can be used. But the purpose is to reduce the flow of sap, and it causes an accumulation of carbohydrates in the budwood. And this increases the chance of the bud taking. I think this sort of process is what a person often goes through before becoming a Christian. You experience something that interferes with the flow of sap that you used to get from your old roots. You realize that something is not right in your life. Sometimes this is a dramatic event, but sometimes it's just a slow realization. Things aren't the way they should be. Things could be better. And this is the preparation process for you to receive Jesus. You feel kind of hungry and unsatisfied. The next step is the grafting itself. A piece of budwood about the size of a pencil is cut from the tree. The one side, the base end of the piece, is cut at a very shallow angle. The rootstock is cut at a matching angle, and this cut has to be very precise because the two surfaces have to meet perfectly. There should be no gaps in between them when they fitted together. Then grafting tape is wrapped around the join to hold things together and to support it. Not all grafts take, so it's important to do this process properly. Over time, the two surfaces grow together, leaving a scar on the bark. When someone becomes a Christian, they need to get grafted into the tree of Christ. It might seem like it's an instant thing, but for a long time, the graft is vulnerable. We, the church, are like the grafting tape that provides support and stability during this time. Now, I've had some trees that were looking pretty good, probably 2 years old, and there was a very strong wind that came up, and they snapped off at the grafting point. So even though things look pretty good on the outside, and even though things look like they're going well, there's still a weakness. And so we need to keep our eyes open, and we need to be alert that the people around us aren't suffering. You know, so often Christians, a person might come to Christ, then after a while they fall away again. And I think when that happens, it means the church hasn't done their job. A sudden stress exposed a weakness beneath the surface of their lives. And we need to be on hand to prevent that weakness from becoming a catastrophe. Over time, the scar disappears, and you actually, if you look at the trunk, you can't even see where the rootstock ends and where the scion begins. And the graft becomes as strong as any other point of the trunk. You become like Jesus. Another thing to bear in mind is that only a pencil-sized piece of wood is grafted in. When you become a Christian, you actually don't take everything with you. You leave a lot behind. But what you do take with you is all the important stuff. Everything that makes you who you are, everything that gives you your identity, everything that makes you valuable comes with you. What you leave behind is the dodgy root system and the diseases that have crept in beneath the soil. After a couple of years, flowers start to appear. Now I'll see if I can show you a flower here. Yeah, these flowers are starting to develop now, and in a while they'll start to form nuts. But as you can see there, each raceme has got hundreds of flowers, and they don't all form nuts. Only a few of them do. To stand a chance, the flower needs pollination. There needs to be an exchange of material from one flower to another. And this interaction is necessary before a flower can develop a fruit. Now, once you have become a Christian, once you've been grafted into the tree of life, the job is not done. You now need to live in relationship with God and with one another. You need that interaction, that cross-pollination, to be fruitful. And that's not the end of the story. Come November, many of the immature nuts are going to drop off. See, self-pollinated nuts can form, but the tree only supports a few nuts to maturity. I was reading an article recently where they've done some DNA analysis of nuts in orchards in Australia, and they found some of the nuts on the tree have been pollinated by a variety that occurs up to 2 kilometers away from the tree site. So the tree really does want to hold on to cross-pollinated nuts. I think that's the way the church should be. I think God wants us to be cross-pollinated with different varieties, different kinds of people, a whole range of humanity, because that gives us the diversity that we need to be able to serve Him and to be able to survive in this world we live in. I heard a story about a guy in the Western Cape who was growing macadamias. It's probably not the ideal climate, and he was battling to set a decent crop. And so what he did was he took branches from a different variety, from 788, and he grafted them every several trees down the row. He grafted a branch of 788 into the Beaumont orchard, and that has dramatically improved his nut set. See, the church is going to be most successful when a diverse range of people are grafted together. Different backgrounds, classes, points of view, race groups, ages, all need to worship together. If we sit around in a group of people exactly like us, self-pollinating, we're not going to get anywhere. God's plan is for all nations to be grafted in. Carrying on, Romans 11 verse 19 says, "You will say then, branches were broken off so that I could be grafted in. Granted, but they were broken off because of unbelief, and you stand by faith. Do not be arrogant, but tremble. For if God did not spare the natural branches, He will not spare you either." It's pretty scary, that idea. It seems like God might cut you out of the tree. And it's happened so many times, especially to the Jews. They were God's chosen people. He had been preparing them for thousands of years, and yet when their Messiah came, they could not recognize him, even though their sacred text pointed to him from beginning to end. See, they became arrogant. Look at my amazing roots. But they weren't they were focused inward. They were focused on the roots. Water and nutrients from the root are not enough. Knowledge of the law, head knowledge, is not enough. So don't become arrogant. We've been grafted in. Our role is a little bit different. Most of us that are listening to this are not Jewish. We're Gentiles. What we do is we just hang out in the sun, photosynthesizing energy through our leaves. We have the light of God's Spirit, but without roots we cannot survive. We are only good for firewood when God cuts us out of the tree. I like to think of the Holy Spirit in this metaphor as like the sun, because it's the source of light, and without light we don't know what's going on. It's also the source of energy, because the Holy Spirit empowers us. See, Christianity doesn't stand alone. Christianity is the fullness of the Jewish religion. We worship the God of the Jews. We follow the Jewish Messiah. Jesus was a Jewish man, and Paul was a Jewish man. Romans 11 carries on in verse 23. And if they do not persist in unbelief, they will be grafted in. For God is able to graft them in again. After all, if you are cut out of an olive tree that is wild by nature, and contrary to nature were grafted into a cultivated olive tree, how much more readily will these, the natural branches, be grafted into their own olive tree? See, many Jews were cut out of the tree. And if I become arrogant and forget that I am totally reliant on Jesus, I could also be cut out. That's scary. But if I don't rely on Jesus, I have no place in that tree. And for the health of the tree, God might need to take his secateurs and take me out. But there's good news. It is possible to be grafted back in. It's always possible to be grafted back in. God's told us that in his word. So the idea of a tree, I like to think of it as the new tree of life, although I don't know how scripturally accurate that is. But the idea of a tree appears in the Bible from beginning to end. In Genesis, we have the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And I'd just like to close off by reading from the last book of the Bible and the last chapter of that book, Revelation 22. Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, as clear as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb, down the middle of the great street of the city. On each side of the river stood the tree of life, bearing 12 crops of fruit, yielding its fruit every month, and the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. I came across a clip recently on YouTube, which feel free to look it up. It's I think it's called the Tree of 40 Fruit, little National Geographic clip. And what this guy's done is he's been collecting, I suppose you'd call them heirloom varieties, varieties that are no longer grown on a commercial scale, and he's been grafting them all into one tree, and now he's got a whole range of fruit, 40 different fruits, all grafted onto the same tree. And it's an absolutely beautiful thing, because all the flowers are slightly different, they flower at different times, all the fruit look different, they're different colors, and it's an absolute work of art. And that's quite a nice picture for me of what God's doing. He's creating this tree, and it's an absolute work of art. You see, I look at my macadamia orchard from a farmer's point of view, because what I'm interested in is getting a crop. I'm interested in the fruit. And God is also a farmer. He's also interested in the fruit. But he's much more than a farmer. He's a gardener. I mean, we weren't placed into the wild. We were placed into a garden. And he's much more than a gardener. He's an artist. He's creating the most beautiful work of art that the world will ever see. And he's doing it right now. And he's got so many different varieties grafted into this tree that he's developing. In fact, he's got probably billions, because each individual is slightly different. Each one of us brings something to the big picture. And I believe there's a place on that tree just right for you, and it's been planned that way ahead of time. There's a spot that you will fit in perfectly. And so I guess in closing, the real question is, do you want to be part of that tree? And if you do, perhaps you already are. But if you feel like you're not one of those branches in that amazing new tree of life, and you want to be, it's actually really, really complicated and also really, really simple. All you have to do is just speak to Jesus and ask him, and he will show you the way. And if you need help, there are other people that will help you. All you've got to do is speak up. All you've got to do is call on the name of the Lord, and you will be saved. So thanks very much, everybody. That's my message from my macadamia orchard.